Hello and welcome to this week's instalment of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
How are you today, Alex?
It is hot, isn't it? I feel as though the sun is not... I've been waiting for the sun to go away and for us to have a few weeks to sort of get back to normal weather so that we can appreciate the heat once more. But it just hasn't stopped. It's just got muggier and muggier, like a over-the-top ceramic shop. Too much mug. That's what I'm...
That's the worst fun I've heard for a long time.
I'm so sorry.
All you need to do, in fact, is go to Edinburgh, because I came back and went to Edinburgh and put my winter wardrobe on and then had the I went to Edinburgh for 3 days, then came back and I was in my thermal shoes and my raincoat and a fleece, and I was perfectly dressed for Edinburgh. And I walked into London and everybody was in sandals and shorts. So I'm in kind of climate shock, really, of oscillating between the two places and two entirely different climates.
There's been a few political storms and actual storms in Edinburgh, which is going to be the first topic on our agenda for today's episode of the WhatsOnStage podcast. We're then going to move on to talk about the Greenwich+Docklands International Festival, which is celebrating its 30th year this year. So that's coming up later this month. Then we're going to stray over to Regent's Park for a discussion about Brigadoon, which you saw last night.
A bit more Scotland.
Yeah, exactly. Scotland in the south. And then finally, we also alighting briefly on that big news story about the potential for ATG to acquire Todaytix, which might have some big ramifications for the theatre industry. But going back to storms and weather, was it Storm Flora? Was that the one that caused an absolute chaos?
Yes. So in fact, my friends in Scotland said it wasn't as bad as they feared, but they were in Lower Scotland, so maybe it was worth higher up.
Yeah, there's shows were cancelled, and I think the Pleasance team were a bit worried about bottom lines when you sort of if you pull one show, it can make the difference between a break-even and a not break-even situation. So,
well, it highlighted the fact that the Pleasance had to cancel a whole day of programming, really highlighted how precarious the finances of the festival now are, because I think they pointed out, that's like a 27th of their income has gone by losing a single day. And that's a huge amount, actually, if you've only got this moment to make your money.
Especially early on when shows need the word of mouth to build the momentum. That first week at the Edinburgh Fringe is the most important one.
Yeah, and also the first week was complicated by the arrival in Edinburgh of Oasis, the bandwagon, who were just had numerous effects, one of which, as became the subject of numerous jokes, was to push hotel prices up to levels that nobody could afford in that first week, so that apparently the Premier Inn, the cheapest room you could get in a Premier Inn in that first week of the Edinburgh Festival, was £385 because people had booked for Oasis. And this, combined with Liam Gallagher sounding off about the festival sort of being nothing and using various expletives to describe his feeling of the sword. He talked about daggers and sword fighting and all kinds of Scottish cliches, just absolutely emphasised what a pillock he is, and made me feel every single thing why I have absolutely no desire ever to see Oasis ever again. I know they were the band of the 90s and all the rest of it, and I have sung along with Wonderwall, but honestly, they are just so annoying.
Tell us how you really feel, Sarah.
I know. It might have to do with support Man City as well. I was talking, this is such a tangent, but I was talking to somebody. I was always on the wrong side of that argument, because, when I was at Telegraph, I was absolutely at the battle of the bands moment with Blur and Oasis. And I was always on the side of Blur. And indeed, have stuck by my admiration for Damon Albarn. But there is very little doubt that in many ways Oasis were the band of the 90s. But they are unbelievably annoying.
Do you want to know, July 7th, 2009, I was at the Ricoh Arena seeing Oasis in Coventry, age 16 or 15. Gosh, that was early.
Yeah, they were an early adopter. If you're an early adopter, that's okay.
Well, is that a late adopter? Should I have really been rocking out to Wonderwall in my cradle Who knows?
I don't know. But anyhow,
That would have been a
Liam,
bit
you're
worrying.
annoying.
Yeah, I think it's that sort of can you lay the blame on like the city council's doorstep or anyone's doorstep for just that huge clash of timetables, or was it literally like you wouldn't turn down having one of the most prominent bands in UK history coming to you, and if the only time that you could make it work was also during the largest arts festival in the world, then you kind of just suck it up and take the financial gain, despite the logistical nightmares that it would create. I don't know. It feels like it was like the city or whoever was making those decisions was caught between a rock and a hard place.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I don't think you could have done much about it, but I think it did have a knock-on effect on that first week. So the combination of the storm and of Oasis did make that first week slightly different. I was surprised going up slightly late because I'd been away. That quite a lot of shows, even shows that had been well received, were not full. There are some sellouts, but there are tickets for quite a lot of good shows, or there were when I was there initially, and that interested me. I think what also I felt too was that it's always very hard going to Edinburgh because there's a sense in which we'll come on to. I utterly love it, and I feel that the Edinburgh Festival is by and large a good thing. I did feel this year, and I think I'm not alone in feeling this, that there was a sense that some of the joins were starting to show, and some of the sense of things being a bit threadbare in terms of British arts were there to see on stage. And Lynn Gardner actually has written a really good piece in The Stage on the same theme, on the idea that the proper funding and rehearsal time and production time of international companies contrasts with a sense slightly of things having been rushed together and put on. And they're good and interesting, but I saw quite a few things that I felt could do with a bit more work and a bit more room to develop and grow. And of course, that's the thing that you don't get when you're fighting with no budgets at all. You have to get it up and get it on its legs and get it out on the road.
I wonder if this is the new reality of the Edinburgh Fringe. We've spoken about big commercial producers using the Fringe as a testing ground for new material, where they'll essentially use it as an extended workshop period. Are we going to start seeing new responsive work that's slightly earlier on in its life cycle, given time in front of an audience, when really you'd probably expect a 6 to 12 month development period to have come before the Fringe? And that's just the world now that we live in. That's the Edinburgh Fringe that we have to look forward to.
Which, has its merits, but then it does butt against ticket prices. I mean, because ticket prices have risen now to more than 20 quid for some shows. And that's really beginning to stretch. So if you're paying that, you sort of want to see something that's reasonably finished and that you don't come out of thinking, well, that needed a bit more work on the ending. I mean, there were a few shows I just thought you really need to get that ending better, which is a sure sign, I think, of a lack of development and lack of time to write and think. The ones I really liked, in fact, had longer development periods. So the 3 shows, 4 actually. Philosophy of the World was my big surprise.
Yeah.
Because I'd never seen...
I feel personally validated by recommending that to you.
I know. It was utterly brilliant. It's absolutely insane and completely brilliant. I adored it. Really adored it.
So what's the now that you've seen it? Because I feel like the description of it was very abstract, but could you sort of like give an appraisal as to what goes on in that show?
I can give you an appraisal. It's in bed with my brother, which is 3 women, and they embody the 3-woman band, the Shags, who had legendary status because they're one of the worst bands ever, and they came into being because they're marginally quite a lot abusive father, Austin Wiggin, was given a prophecy that his daughters would be in a famous rock band. And he basically stuck them in the cellar and told them to play their instruments and learn to play, and then funded concerts for them to play. But they were always rubbish. They never really seemed to have any talent at all. But they then became seen, after he died and after they'd released one unsuccessful album, they became a cult classic, a sort of proto-punk band, championed by people like Kurt Cobain. And what the show does is make that story, which is true, into an examination of who has the right to say who does what, whether in fact the Shag's late success is a result of being adopted by men rather than as a result of their own talent. And talks about all kinds of women who have been, at some levels, have had their capacity for growth stunted by men. But that makes it sound really serious, whereas in fact it's quite dark and dangerous and violent. There's a lot of beating up of people goes on. But it's also very funny, incredibly cleverly told. The story is told in captions, which the cast respond to. So as each caption comes up, for example, they are pelted with Pepsi cans, the action happens. So they react all the time. And it's just incredibly clever and wild, and ends up with this mad lecture about feminism. And I really loved it, though my ears did suffer slightly. If you've got sensitive hearing, take headphones. But it's great. It's really great. So that was one of my favourites. Ohio by the Bengsons was one of my favourites, another musical show. Consumed by Caris Kelly, I think, is a really good play. Winner of the Women's Playwriting Prize.
Yeah, well, Women's Prize for Playwriting.
Thank you. I knew that was the right words in the wrong order. Women's Prize for Playwriting. And also another of your choices, Lost Lear by Dan Colley, who is really amazing, about sort of dementia and family relations and Shakespeare. So I had a good time, actually.
I think that one, actually, I'm not going to claim too much credit for that, because Fergus Morgan, who is the stage's Scottish correspondent, also writes for Financial Times and Scotsman, went over to Ireland and saw that at Dublin's Theatre Festival and said that was his standout show in 2022. So again, international work that's had a lot of life before coming over and wowing audiences, rather than the stuff that, like you say, might have had less time to be put together.
Yeah, and I feel that, it just feels slightly like a trend, and it's a worry, and I think that's actually being serious about Liam Gallagher. Why Liam Gallagher's remarks are so unhelpful is it creates this hostile climate. It creates this idea that the arts, unless they're pop, don't matter. It creates this idea that, theatre and struggling theatre companies and street magicians and all those other things in Liam's worldview are shit. And the fact is that that's a view that I find generally, which I keep saying on this podcast, is a view generally that is harming culture in this country. It's harming the idea of what culture can do for, not just for cities, but for people who encounter it.
I feel you setting up our next topic of conversation very aptly there, because I think one of the festivals that epitomises that is the Greenwich+Docklands International Festival, which returns later this month. And we're talking about it now, coinciding with a wonderful book that's been published by Fiona Hughes, or written by Fiona Hughes, and it documents 30 years of the festival across a completely transformed East London space, and the context in which the festival first evolved in the late 1990s is so different to the context in which it is now being presented to audiences. What was your takeaway from looking through the book, Sarah? Recollecting some of your favourite moments from the festival?
The takeaway that Fiona's got a really great sentence about, there is nothing quite as exhilarating as those moments where it feels as if art and imagination have taken over the everyday world. And that is to me, part of festivals. One of the things, just to finish Edinburgh, that I love about Edinburgh is that it engages with the city. It engages with the tourists. I mean, you may be sniffy about walking down the Royal Mile, which is full of street performers, but it also does make people think, here we are in the midst of something that is happening that isn't every day. And there are lots of free events and lots of excitement among the people that you talk to about going to see things. They choose to go and see things, they spend their money wisely, and they go and have a good time. And I really feel that's incredibly important. What is particularly true of the Greenwich+Docklands International Festival is that you literally fall across events in places that you don't expect to. It's always had a huge tradition of street art, street events, parades, processions. It's got an immense quality of spilling out into the world around it. They do a dance day that everything is free and you just fall across it. And it's brilliant. I love that. I love seeing dancers in the open air performing unexpected things that people just suddenly go, "Ooh, that's interesting," and watch.
It's so striking looking through the photos how areas like Stratford and Woolwich are basically unrecognisable now from when the festival first began. And that must be quite surreal for the festival organisers, that they're kind of encountering new public spaces and yet still having to respond to the ideas of community and, local conversation in new ways. So I think one of the things that Fiona does in her book is she breaks up all the chapters into different themes. So they'll talk about the decline of high streets and how there's all these boarded up shops in East London because no one's going to buy things on the high street anymore. But then there'll also be topics about the climate catastrophe and racism. And the festival responds to all of those things, but it has to constantly change in the way in which it's responding to those things. And I think that's really interesting, seeing seeing a festival that can't really ever take for granted what it is or who it has to identify as, because there's so much going on at the same time.
It's been hugely adaptable, and that's one of its great qualities, I think, of constantly rethinking itself, constantly changing and redeveloping to respond to the times around it. And I do love the site-specific work that it's brought. So I remembered seeing A Blue Remembered Hills, which is Dennis Potter's TV play, performed in Thamesmead in kind of a bit of derelict land with a huge hill that it was a Belgian collective called Jeruvas who had to keep running up and down this hill. And it was extraordinary to see it in that kind of slightly bleak, desolate setting and respond to it as a play about a place of beauty. It was very interesting.
I think I remember rightly that Full Metal Jacket, the Stanley Kubrick Vietnam film, they actually filmed the war scenes at the Royal Docks in London because it looked, there was such a sense of like that urban decay at the time when they were filming it. And that's sort of like what you're saying about how these found spaces could evoke something so specific and create something, and they can tell their own story. And in a way, the festival, in the same way, can chime in with that story and build up its own artistic vision around that. It'll be interesting to see how it continues to do that as sort of like this wave of gentrification continues over Greenwich and the Docklands area. Or, it can capitalize on all these new spaces and new infrastructures that exist, like the Olympic Park, and bring audiences to its events in their own ways.
Yeah. What would your favourite memory be?
So in 2018, just after I joined it's a year after I joined WhatsOnStage, so it's my second festival. So just to pull the curtain back, we go into a lot of rehearsal rooms to sort of like do interviews with cast members or companies before they hit the stage. But this one was particularly unique because it was a rehearsal video with Duke Riley, who was a US performance artist, and he had thousands upon thousands of pigeons. And this was for a show called Fly By Night, which was a co-production between Greenwich+Docklands and Lift and 14 to 18 Now, which was a sort of celebration of the centenary of the First World War. And this was basically an installation show dedicated to all the carrier pigeons they used during the First World War. But essentially, during the video, what I was doing is just filming a load of pigeons doing choreography in the air. And I was like, this is some of the most impressive stuff I've ever seen. And I was like, pigeons are putting West End companies to shame with their slick moves. And that I was watching it again this morning, just before we did the podcast. And genuinely, some of the most magical things I've ever seen. And it's like you say, going back to the Liam Gallagher point, no one would ever expect this to be the kind of arts that they would immediately think about when someone asks them what culture means. But when you get blindsided by the unexpected, it can be the most magical experience. And I think this festival encapsulates that completely.
Yeah, I really do. And hats off to them for keeping going and for keeping that spirit alive and that spirit of access and also adventure, which I think are the two qualities that characterise it as a festival and which I really admire in them. I also would like to just do a shout out for pigeons. I've read one of the things over the summer is I read an article about how you must be nice to pigeons because it's man's fault or humankind's fault that we have so many pigeons because we encourage them as throughout history as messengers and as because they're so clever. So ever since then, I've been being very kind to pigeons in Trafalgar Square, in Venice. I talk to them. I don't shoo them off. I let them share my dinner. I tell you something really interesting we discovered in Venice is that Venice has got a pigeon problem and a seagull problem. Obviously lots of water. And we were talking to a cafe owner and she said what the seagulls do is they watch the pigeons. They also tragically eat the pigeons, but that's a separate story. They watch the pigeons to see where the food is accessible. And then they swoop in and take the food from under the pigeon's nose. Wow. So pigeons' basic intelligence is being now used by seagulls.
So next time I see you at press night in the West End, you'll be walking down Charing Cross Road chattering to pigeons as you go along.
I will. I'll become like Feed the Birds in Mary Poppins.
Yeah, so maybe they could get you in the tour just for the final stops. I'm sure Cameron would be able to make that happen.
Yeah.
Who is it? Yeah.
Sorry, I've taken us...
No, that's all right. Petula Clark would be proud about where this conversation is going.
Yes,
so
it's a bit off topic.
Yeah, well, speaking of new topics then, I guess we're staying outdoors, but you went to see a big musical last night.
I did. So I went to see the first night of Brigadoon, Lerner and Lowe, who are better known as the writers of My Fair Lady. Brigadoon is 1947. It's one of those lost musicals. One of our colleagues as critics has said there's a reason it's a lost classic. and there are reasons that it's a lost classic. It has its problems as a musical. But what was very striking at the open air was how well a story about a vanishing Scottish village, sort of magical enchanted place, fits into an open air setting. And it's beautifully directed and choreographed by Drew McConey, who is now running the open air. And it has a very good new book, I think, by Rona Munro, keeping up the Scottish theme. And I think what is interesting is that I think it will do well and I think people will really enjoy it. What's been interesting about the open air theatre this week as well, though, is that they are so successful. They have become, in a counter to the times, one of the UK's most successful brands, which I think is really interesting.
I was looking back over their recent productions over the last 8 years or so, just how many of them have gone on to have future lives beyond the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. So you've got Evita, which started out at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre and then was sort of like adapted and transformed for its new run at the London Palladium, but becoming the biggest summer show of the year. Then you've also got Fiddler on the Roof, which just finished a sold-out season at the Barbican after selling out Regent's Park Open Air Theatre last year, now going out on tour. Then you've got Jesus Christ Superstar, which Drew McConey did the choreography for, which did a big tour and continues to tour across the world. It's kind of like the new definitive production of Jesus Christ Superstar. I think it's just incredible the reach that this venue has, considering it's only really doesn't run more than half of the year. It has a year-round impact that goes well beyond what it actually programs during that summer period.
I think it's so interesting because the person I went with doesn't go to the theatre that often, and she was saying that the last time she went to the open air was about 15 years ago, when it really was incredibly ramshackle. And it was just a place that you went if it was a nice evening. And it is that ability to overcome season and weather that is distinguishing it as an open-air theatre. If you think about the Minnock in Cornwall, which is an equally beautiful setting for an open-air performance, that hasn't managed to bring in... That is just a sort of wonderful place. What Regent's Park has done is become something beyond its setting and become a production brand, and that's very smart, and I think quite deliberate. I think it's been worked on, and they've had, successive directors have moved towards that aim, and it's really paid off at a time when it is incredibly hard, as discussed, to make any money out of theatre.
I think we've spoken to him on the podcast, I think, when they won the Olivier for Fiddler on a Roof, but James Pidgeon, who's the executive director there, has done an incredible job forging links with commercial producers. So a lot of commercial producers were involved in Shucked when that had its UK premiere there earlier this year. But also you've got Trafalgar Entertainment, who are working with the park for Fiddler on the Roof for its tour and also for its Barbican season. And then obviously you've got Michael Harrison and the Lloyd Webber brand working on Evita with Jamie Lloyd. So building the open air into this overall commercial space has been a very fruitful move, or sort of like a continued move, because I think it probably started in the 2010s. But it's exciting to see where that goes next, because we don't have very many big playing spaces that have the size, canvas-wise, that the open air theatre provides. So it's nice that we can have big, hearty productions like Brigadoon put on stages, and the team know that they're likely to have an audience that are just willing to go and experience theatre outdoors, but also with an eye to think, okay, what else can we do with the show? Can this be a production of Brigadoon now that is licensed elsewhere, and that can actually, this new version by Rona Munro can be the definitive 21st century take on Brigadoon? But also, can Shucked transfer somewhere? Could they take that indoors? Could they take that on tour? I think it's remarkable, and there was a great piece in the Times responding to this move that they've done, and it's quite clear that it's a very concerted move. As you say, it's not something that they've done by accident.
The thing that I loved about Brigadoon, I like the dance, which sort of has a tribute to the original Agnes de Mille, but is also very much Drew's own thinking on dance. But it's also got an incredibly good creative team of young designers and lighting designers who are looking at theatre in a different way. The costumes for Brigadoon are by Sammy Fendel, who won the Limbury Prize for design in 2019, overall design. And they're just, I thought, sumptuously clever, because they combine the Dior new look of the period that the film comes out with traditional Scottish themes and fabrics, and there's a sense that they're both authentic and completely new. And the colour range, especially seen in the open air, is sensational. It's all sort of yellows and moss greens and lilacs and pinks. Gorgeous. It's really, really gorgeous. And I had a sense watching it. I think there's something about being in the open air that you have to make an impact with things like costumes. They have to have texture and colour in a way if you're going to create a romantic landscape, because you haven't got the advantages of a theatre that, where you can control the environment. You're in an uncontrolled environment. And I really feel that there is a sense that creativity is being encouraged. And I was very struck by that. I don't know if that's... Because actually, I do think that, because I felt it was the same with Fiddler on the Roof. There was a sense of design, which was Tom Scott, of really thinking what the design would look like in the open air and how you change things and how you make texture and colour work for you. So I think it's, hooray for the open air, and well done for the branding and for giving yourself a sustainable life that, is beyond the summer.
Yeah, I think it's... Are we going to forge a natural segue now into our final topic for today?
Talking of branding, that's what you're going
Talking of branding, one of the big stories over the weekend was the rumoured move by ATG to acquire Todaytix. Both very big brands in their own right. I think Todaytix over the last 10 years has sort of become a shorthand for mobile ticketing purchases and sort of tapping into new audiences through dynamic ticket offerings like rush tickets or lotteries, etc. Whereas ATG, one of the biggest theatre producing, theatre venue owning brands in the world. So it was fascinating when that came out to see the two courting to some extent, and I think it's still early doors. I think bids, according to the Sunday Times, are taking place this week, and there are other names that are in the mix. So Fever, which is an American-based ticketing and events listing brand, is also looking to acquire Todaytix. But it could be sort of like a transformative moment for the theatre industry for a variety of reasons. I think we could probably dedicate the whole specialist podcast to investigating. But the thing that stood out to me most sort of like significantly is that Todaytix commands this huge amount of audience data, especially young audiences who are searching for their favourite shows and trying to find the best ticketing deals, and sort of like they can log their favourite shows, they can rate their favourite shows, and all that data, if that's being pumped into ATG, could be relatively massive in terms of the impact, because I think there's still a debate about what new audiences want or how they behave, especially younger audiences that have limited funds. And if you're a venue like ATG or a producer like ATG, it's great to be able to know what are young people thinking about theatre. What is the data point and what are the ticket prices where they want to opt out. And I think data now is something that the theatre world has potentially been lagging behind in terms of its technological innovation. So this could be a big, big play if it comes off. We don't know, could end up being another sort of nondescript equity company that buys Todaytix instead. But it's could be one of the biggest industry moves this decade, I think, if it does happen.
It is really interesting. Some of the research I'm doing about a period not very far away. So in the 1980s, I've been looking at Keith Prowse Ticketing, which was the first big ticketing agency and worked with all the London hotels and shops to provide tickets for theatres. And what is extraordinary, so we're talking, within 40 years, people had to buy a ticket, a physical ticket, which a man then had to walk to a theatre and get, and then deliver to the person who bought the ticket. And it is extraordinary that we come from that to digital tickets and this, as you say, incredible data that is now available in a relatively short period of time, because that model would have been recognisable to the Victorians. So that the sense of accelerated change, I think, is really interesting. I'm all in favour of data. I always hope that it doesn't lead to people only commissioning things that the data shows that you want. Yeah. Because I think the danger with data is this is true in theatre, it's true in health, it's true in every aspect of our lives. It's always retrospective. It only shows what has become ahead. It never ever shows what you don't know you wanted or you don't know you needed. I feel that the danger of making creativity data driven is there, as well as the obvious advantages, but I think great breakthroughs are often against the data.
Look at something like Netflix and you hear about the algorithm being basically like a deity in terms of deciding what creatively should and shouldn't work, and then something comes along like adolescence, which a one-shot story about horrific crime being committed by a child in rural UK or like northern England, and no one would ever have expected that to be the breakaway hit. Or Baby Reindeer, I feel like an AI could never have dreamt up that being a huge smash hit. It's maybe a sort of like, maybe the data point is something that I'm thinking more in terms of hypothetical rather than reality, in terms of what ATG would want to do with Todaytix. They might want to just keep them going as they are and just have a nice sort of like, sort of like tap into what they're achieving. The other thing that Todaytix owns is they own Secret Cinema, which is a huge brand, and I think ATG could totally capitalize on that Secret Cinema brand to find new experiences for audiences, like immersive theatre or touring theatre in found spaces, to try and bring this podcast back to where it began. I think Secret Cinema's just opened that new version of open air Grease in Battersea Park. So if they try and replicate that model through an ATG production across the UK, that could be great for theatre.
Yeah.
If there's a immersive Secret Cinema version of Grease in Edinburgh next August, then we called it.
Yeah, well, no, somebody was listening to this podcast.
Yes, or just, I think that's always an opportunity, but it will be interesting to see how this plays out and how it also affects other ticket affiliates who have similar business models to Todaytix, because it's a very turbulent landscape, and everyone wants to get in on that new ticketing sort of like innovation space. So yeah, it's watch this space, because at the moment a lot of it is conjecture. Yeah. We'll probably quite a few months before anything tangible comes along that we know about, but it's a very intriguing one, and nice that we have interesting things to talk about on the podcast.
Exactly.
We've really gone from topic to topic today.
Yeah, and I want to end with a small plug, because I'm on my way back to Edinburgh to appear at the Edinburgh International Books Festival with two other critics, Chitra Ramaswamy and Arifa Akbar, and we're going to talk about the day's news, but also about the role of criticism in the modern world and how it's changing. So if you happen to be up in Edinburgh and up at 10 o'clock on Monday the 18th, we will be there at the Books Festival talking. Please buy tickets, come along and listen to us, and I'll report back in our next podcast.
Perfect. Well, I think on that note, just as the building works beginning next door.
Good moment to end the podcast.
We have timed this to perfection. I cannot wait to hear from your part 2 of your Edinburgh trip, Sarah. Maybe my Edinburgh FOMO might kick in. But in the meantime, it's a goodbye from me, Alex Wood.
And a goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton.
Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and rate the podcast wherever you can. We'll be back with regular episodes every Friday and a smattering of bonus episodes in between.